Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't put a dream in your heart if you don't have the capabilities of achieving that dream. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, my lovely sisters. Welcome to the second episode of the Called to Success podcast. I hope you're doing well, and I pray your fasts and your good deeds are being accepted. Today, we're going to talk about something I think we all struggle with, which is wasting time, and specifically wasting time through endless scrolling on social media. This is something that becomes even more important during Ramadan, I think, because this month is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and really a time to draw closer to Him and maximize our worship. And we really don't want social media to get in the way of that. And I know we often start Ramadan with the best of intentions. We want to read more Quran, make more dua, and spend time doing dhikr. But somehow the hours sometimes slip away because a quick scroll on Instagram can turn into an hour or even hours, and watching one video becomes a whole playlist. And we don't want that feeling when the day is gone and we feel disappointed in ourselves because it kind of has slipped away. So in today's episode, I want to share some practical tips on how to stop wasting time during this month and beyond, inshallah. And this will kind of specifically be focused on breaking free from doom scrolling. So let's get into it. Before going straight into the solutions, let's first understand the problem, because why do we waste so much time, specifically online? I know that social media apps are of course designed to keep us hooked, and every time we scroll or like or engage with the content we see, the algorithm gets better and gets to know us better, and at the same time our brains release dopamine, and this just creates a cycle of instant gratification, making it harder to stop even though we know we should. Because you know when you're scrolling and you feel like, oh, I should be doing something else, but you just can't stop, or you close the app for a moment and then you're back with it just a few minutes later. And one thing that I find even trickier is that we often convince ourselves that we are being productive because, for example, we're watching beneficial content or maybe an Islamic lecture or an Islamic reel, reading motivational posts. It does feel like growth, but really if we don't take the time to reflect and apply what we're consuming, it just becomes another form of passive scrolling, because really knowledge without action, it doesn't really transform us at all. Think of it like this: if you're constantly consuming without allowing yourself the space to process and reflect, none of it will stick, even if it is Islamic content. And this is kind of a message to you, but mostly to myself, because sometimes my For You page is filled with Islamic content, so vlogs or maybe posts that have information about Islam, but really I'm not taking it in, so I'm not gaining anything from it. And with doom scrolling, it's really like we're rushing through our feeds as if we're kind of chasing an unformed question, looking for something, though not yet sure what we are looking for, and hoping the next post will finally kind of satisfy that craving, but it really never does. And sometimes we also experience like a false sense of self along the way. I know I'm getting kind of deep into the issue, but I really wanted to talk about this because we might come across a post that we, for example, disagree with, but without pausing to form our own thoughts, we immediately jump into the comments section. We see one of the top comments perfectly capturing what we felt, and we think, oh my god, yes, that is exactly what I thought and wanted to say. But let's be honest here, did we really come to that conclusion ourselves, or did we just borrow someone else's opinion and made it our own? This whole process of doom scrolling, it becomes like a loop. You're consuming content, you're adopting service level reactions and mistaking them for genuine reflection. And the scary part is that after a long scrolling session, can you even remember what you saw? Can you recall 5 reels you watched and explain what they did for you? Or like we're discussing today, was it all just kind of like a thief of your time? And there's a powerful hadith that really puts time into perspective. The Prophet ﷺ said, there are 2 blessings which many people lose: health and free time for doing good. And Honestly, most of us in Ramadan have both. We have the health to fast and worship, alhamdulillah, and we have the free time we often waste. So let's not be among those who lose these blessings. Okay, so I do have a little exercise for you, which I would recommend trying out the next time you're scrolling on your phone and consuming content, to briefly pause after every post, just for a few times, and have that internal dialogue with yourself that is basically asking, what does this post do with you? And what does this post do for you? And if you learn something, for example, from an Islamic video, a lecture, or just a post, ask yourself, can I explain this concept in my own words? Because even if it's beneficial content, if you cannot really explain it in your own words, you're not really internalizing it enough and learning about it enough. So this is a very time-consuming exercise to do after every post, but I do recommend trying it out at least once. And it also does put your consumption of social media in perspective, like you do feel differently afterwards. All right, now let's get to the practical tips to stop wasting time. So let's first talk about what we can do to cut down on wasted time and focus on what truly matters in Ramadan. It is, of course, worshipping. So the advice I have here is really like treating yourself like a 10-year-old child, in the sense that you are trying to set some boundaries with yourself. This month, I've been treating myself like a 10-year-old child, in the sense that I have a strict schedule when it comes to my screen time. And it sounds so funny, but it has been working. I get 30 minutes of iPad time every day, and I removed my social media from my phone and can only access it on my iPad now. So when I do have the 30 minutes, I scroll on my iPad, which is just not as satisfying as scrolling on your phone, because it's like an old iPad and everything works very slowly. So 30 minutes is more than enough. And in this time, for example, I look for inspiration, reply to comments, and maybe post something myself as well. But really, it's limited to that one period throughout the day. So this is kind of a way for you to set boundaries with yourself, either by removing social media apps from your phone and instead checking them on a less convenient device, such as an iPad or a laptop. You can also set app timers, the ones, for example, with iPhone, where you have built-in screen time, and after, for example, 30 minutes or an hour, you get the notification of, hey, you've reached your screen time limit. I always had the screen time limit on my iPhone with social media for an hour, but I do realize that you can just skip the notification and continue on social media. So that hasn't been working that much for me, but maybe it does for you. And another thing that you could do is create either a no phone zone during the day or a phone zone during the day. So it kind of depends on how you're looking at it. So for example, you don't go on your phone or any other device after suhoor for 1 hour and an hour before iftar, or maybe after tarawih or isha prayer, you don't go on your phone anymore, just so that you have that screen time free zone during the day. Another thing that you could do is to set yourself a screen time zone during the day. So you just say to yourself, for example, between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. I can go on my phone, and after that I cannot. So it's kind of the same thing, but you can treat it as a no phone zone or a phone zone. But okay, if you do set these rules for yourself and set these boundaries with yourself, you do have to replace the time that you usually spend on social media on something else. So really, it's not just about removing, it's about replacing. So let's get into some things that you could do instead of scrolling. So first, of course, with the Islamic things you can do, it is, of course, reading an Islamic book, something that boosts your faith and your knowledge. I am personally currently reading The Secrets of Divine Love, which is an Islamic book on like a spiritual journey to Islam, and it's not an academic book, but it does feel like you're gaining lots of knowledge from it, and also it feels in a way like poetry. I have read this book 2 times already, but every time I reread it, I get some more gems from it, and this book has kind of been a book that helped me draw so close to Islam when I was in the process of converting or reverting to Islam. It just speaks to you in such a personal way, and yeah, just makes you fall in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with Islam. I highly recommend checking out this book if you're looking for something not too academic, but still about Islam as well. Another thing you could do is Quran journaling, even if it's just an ayah. You can research about your favorite surahs, your favorite ayah, ayahs and learn about them, write it down in a journal, and go from there. This is also a little bit time consuming, but this is more for the periods where you were usually, for example, doom scrolling for hours. You can replace this with Quran journaling. Another thing that you could do is to listen to a beneficial podcast. I really hope this podcast is a beneficial podcast for you. I hope you can have it on in the background while going on a walk or cleaning or maybe cooking in the kitchen, like anything at all. I really hope that this podcast can help you throughout Ramadan as well to decrease your regular screen time and replace it with something that is hopefully beneficial. So really try to find podcasts that you like or lectures that you like that you can have in the background and use the time to feed your mind and your soul. Other things that you could do instead of scrolling through social media are to, for example, journal, do a workout, or if it's too much during Ramadan, just go for a short walk or do some stretching. Do your dhikr on your walks or write a letter. Get to some things you've been avoiding, some tasks you've been procrastinating, maybe in the house. There are so many like cute self-care activities as well that you could do instead of scrolling. So I highly recommend thinking to yourself, like, what do you enjoy doing? What gives you the dopamine that social media also gives you? And basically think, how can you replace the doom scrolling with other maybe hobbies to try that are also giving you that dopamine? And also, if you struggle with creating a worship-focused routine, and if you are looking for something to do instead of scrolling, I have a very cute idea. It's not a new idea, it's just something that social media, funny enough, has taught me, I guess. It's to create a dopamine menu, and specifically the Muslim girl Ramadan dopamine menu. So what is this? It's basically a menu with a list of activities that bring you joy, bring you dopamine and fulfillment without the endless scroll. So if you have a moment where you don't have anything to do, I recommend you actually make a physical menu with the starters, the mains, the desserts, the sides, the specials, and maybe even the drinks part as well. I'll explain how you can do this, inshallah. Basically, the Ramadan dopamine menu is a menu that you can find in any restaurant, in the sense that it has starters, it has mains, it has desserts. But instead of like actual food, because we are of course fasting, so it does sound a little bit silly to be writing out a menu when you're fasting, but stick with me. The starters are basically activities that are very short, that you can do for 5 minutes or at max 15 minutes, that help you get a sense of joy that doesn't need to come from social media. So for example, starters could be reciting or memorizing one ayah of the Quran, or making a short, sincere dua for someone else or for yourself. It could be writing down things you're grateful for on that day. It could be listening to a short Islamic reminder that is just like 5 or 10 minutes. And of course, it could be doing your dhikr counter. That is, for example, something that you can have as your starters in your Ramadan dopamine menu. Now, the main dish is something that, of course, takes more time. This is something that can take 30 minutes or more. So this could be a Quran journaling session like I talked about. This does take some more time. Pick a surah and reflect deeply on it. It is such a lovely way to spend the time. So also, again, read a chapter from an Islamic book or attend a virtual Islamic class. Prepare iftar, but do it mindfully. For example, doing dhikr while cooking, or reflect and write about a lesson you learned from a hadith, and this in a long way, like in a way where you're busy with it for at least 30 minutes. So this is the main. Now let's get to the desserts. The desserts are sweet treats for once in a while. So these are things that you don't necessarily have on a daily basis, but they're just nice to have when you do have them. So for example, buy yourself a new Islamic book or maybe a journal as well. Like this makes you feel so good and also motivated to start with, for example, Islamic journaling. Or treat yourself to a self-care night, doing skincare, and then finishing the night with clean sheets and, for example, reading the Quran. Or spend some extra time on a special iftar meal that is nourishing, that is healthy, and that is something that you haven't tried out before, but you have taken the time to create something delicious for you and, for example, for your family. And finally, dessert is, of course, also to go to the masjid. Dessert is also Tarawih prayer, or an iftar gathering. So going to the mosque to pray Tarawih, even though of course a lot of people do this every day, it is kind of like a sweet treat after iftar. Now there are sides. These are things like, for example, like I said, listening to a podcast. This can be done while doing something else as well. So side dishes are dishes that you can do while doing something else and making that time feel a bit more joyful. So that is listening to a podcast, listening to Quran recitation, or reflecting on your goals while having your suhoor, or listening to a short tafsir while taking a walk. So there are many things to do during walking, cleaning, preparing your food, commuting, those sort of things, and make a list of the side dishes that come with this that you could do to make that experience more joyful. Now finally, you have a set of specials. So you're in your own restaurant and you have a few specials that are for bigger events. Now this could be, for example, to organize a Quran session with friends or family, or organize your own iftar with friends or family. What I have done every year since reverting is that I have a iftar night with my family. Basically, they fast with me throughout the day and we break our fast together. And I see this iftar with my family as kind of a moment for dawah, of a moment for showing them what Islam is about. I think this is such a beautiful way to show Islam to non-Muslims. Like also Ramadan for me personally, before I became Muslim, was something that I looked up to so much. And that's also why I fasted during Ramadan years before I even reverted, because I just thought it was just such a beautiful experience, and it just gives this great sense of gratitude for what you do have on a daily basis, and like a reality check for how you spend your days and how many urges you act on throughout the day when it comes to food or drinks. So for me, my special is to host an iftar event for my non-Muslim family and show them what Islam is about. For you, this could be hosting your own iftar for family or friends, or maybe planning a charity project and organizing donations or helping out at the mosque. For specials, you really have to look at yourself to see what fits for you. I couldn't really make that up for you, but yeah, think about how you could have a very special Ramadan night and put that in your Ramadan dopamine menu. And if you have the time, I think it's such a fun activity to actually make the physical dopamine menu for Ramadan and look at it when you are, for example, feeling the urge of scrolling on social media. Look at your menu and think, okay, I'm just going to have a quick starter for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to do, and then you look at the list and you're saying, okay, I'm going on a short walk while doing dhikr. And that is kind of how you can use the dopamine menu. I think I'm going to make a video about this as well on YouTube, just because it's such a cute activity that we could do together. Now let's get on with the rest of the practical tips to stop wasting time on social media. So the first tip was basically to set some boundaries with yourself in however way fits you. The second one was to replace, not just remove. And then now let's get to the third part, which is about creating a routine for yourself, because I love talking about habits and routines. It's really basically the thing that fills up our life. Even if you think there's no routine, that is the routine, and how you spend your days is how you spend your life. Now, Ramadan is the perfect time to create a worship-focused routine that can last you even after the month is over, inshallah. Now, I always say this, and I feel like everyone always says it, but you really should try to schedule your day around your prayers. On a daily basis, what do you do between Fajr and Dhuhr? What do you do between Dhuhr and Asr? Like, there is a correlation. Like, every day you kind of do the same thing, and there is maybe some difference between work days or school days and the weekend. But on average, you do see a correlation between how you're spending the time in between prayers. And you can maximize that. For me personally, my productive hours are between Fajr and Dhuhr. So for me, my current routine is that after Fajr, I immediately go into the Quran. I'm trying to read a juz a day, of course, so that I finish the Quran at the end of Ramadan. And I usually actually finish the juz after Fajr, except for maybe a few verses which I leave for later. This already gives me such a strong start of the day, because I feel like I've already done such an important thing, which is reading Quran, and then there's just a little bit left over for me to do later. But that is kind of a trick that I've been playing with myself, because I could actually finish the entire juz after Fajr, but I'm leaving a little bit for later, because if you are reading it later, you immediately just start reading more and more, just because, yeah, the Quran is that good. So that is kind of a trick that I am playing on myself, to read Quran throughout the day, not just at one moment. And then like the productive hours of the things, the tasks that I have to do, I try to do those between Fajr and Dhuhr, so that the period after Dhuhr and leading up to Asr, and also kind of the period from Asr until Maghrib, I can focus on things worship, because I already got my tasks done. So for example, after Dhuhr, I practice my recitation of specific surahs, and after Asr, I usually have, like, I call it self-care time, but I really try to make it worship as well. I read, for example, The Secrets of Divine Love, make notes on it, learn from it, and yeah, that is kind of how I'm spending my time. The period between Maghrib and Isha is of course about breaking your fast, being mindful, praying, and making sure that even though the fast is over, you're still watching your tongue, doing dhikr, and also just minding how you are behaving, not being too overindulgent in the food. That is kind of what the period between Maghrib and Isha is for. And then either I pray Isha or I pray Tarawih at the mosque. It kind of differs per day. I don't go every day. This is really how you can create a daily worship focused routine. See how you usually spend your time, maximize your productivity by doing your hardest tasks in the period where you are already most productive, so that you can spend the rest of the time on worship, however way that looks for you. And of course, on working days or school days, you feel like you are following a routine or a schedule instead of setting one for yourself. But you just gotta shift your mindset around this. Because, for example, if I am working from 9 to 5, then I see my 9 until 5 as that period that I'm hopefully beneficial for society, doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having a few breaks in between where I do my worshipping, I do pray, I do my dhikr, and then when the 9 to 5 is done, I have already been, like, I know it sounds so silly, but I have already been beneficial for society, and then it's time to do other worshipping. So try to shift your mindset, try to see that everything that you're doing can be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and work your routine around the schedules that you have, and specifically work your routine around your prayers. Now, another thing that could help you with decreasing your time on social media and decreasing your wasted time is to find yourself an accountability partner. Now, having someone to check in with you can make a huge difference. So you can find a friend or a sibling or a spouse who also wants to cut down on wasted time, and every day you share your goals, your wins, and maybe your losses as well. Keep it realistic, and this is kind of a simple way to stay motivated. And in general, surrounding yourself with those who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it makes it so much easier for you to stay on track. I've been doing something that has created the strongest accountability partner ever. I recently wrote a letter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just before the Ramadan with all my intentions, my goals, and it was kind of a love letter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all in one letter. And I basically wrote out my intentions, and one of the intentions that I had was to decrease my time on social media and also decrease my time with watching shows, for example, that are not beneficial, all for the sake of not wasting as much time. And I wrote that out as my intentions in that letter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have created the strongest sense of accountability through this, because I have officially declared my intentions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows my intentions, because He of course can look straight into my heart, but I went out, made the efforts to write them out, and it just feels much more official if you do it that way, or if you do it in a dua, for example. But yeah, I declared my intentions, and of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of everything you do. So if you set intentions and don't follow up with them for reasons that are not good enough, so for example, there is no good reason why you didn't go through with your intention, like if you do that after declaring your intentions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is so painful, that is so embarrassing. Like, so how am I telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I'm planning on doing one thing and I'm not doing it for no good reason at all. Setting out your intentions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is such a good way of staying accountable, because what is more painful than failing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for no good reason at all? And I know this can kind of sound like shaming your way into doing things, or maybe you feel like, okay, so you're doing the thing that you set out to do because you'd be embarrassed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you don't do the thing, and it kind of maybe for you creates a negative way of starting to do the things that you set out to do. Maybe it feels like fear is pushing you to do the things instead of love. And I know for me personally, I'd like to have a balance between doing things out of fear for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing things out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I am realistic with myself in the sense that I do some things really out of fear. And I don't know how this sounds for you, but like for me, it sounds like a realistic relationship that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I know how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So I do things out of love, but I also know how scary Jahannam sounds. So I also do things out of fear. I feel like that's a healthy balance. But if you, for example, feel like you really want to do things out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I recommend shifting your mind, not thinking, oh, it would be so embarrassing if I didn't do the thing because I said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I was going to do it. And instead of working from fear, you should perceive it from a loving perspective, which can be done in this case. Namely, if you have set the intentions, you have had the thoughts that you could be this specific Muslim woman, then that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed that dream, that thought, that intention in your heart as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't put a dream in your heart if you don't have the capabilities of achieving that dream, achieving becoming that Muslim woman that you want to be. And to make it specific for this episode, if you have had the dream or the goal of not spending time on social media too much at least, and not wasting any time this Ramadan because you want to focus on worship, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also believes that you can do this. This has been a goal that has been set in your heart, and you have the capabilities of achieving this dream. So to shift it to a loving perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala believes in you. How could you not believe in yourself? So yeah, here is basically how you can have two different perspectives on the accountability body that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be for you. And I mean that with all the respect. I know it sounds a little bit silly, so may Allah forgive me if it's a wrong thing to say, but really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates this huge sense of accountability for you. So let's act on that. Another thing that we should shift our thinking with is the idea of FOMO and JOMO. So basically, sometimes we feel like we are scrolling because we fear missing out on trends, on updates, on what others are doing. But this Ramadan, let's just embrace the joy of missing out. You are not missing out when you put your phone down. In fact, you're gaining so much more. More barakah in your time, more peace in your heart, and more focus in your worship. Because honestly, for humans, it is not natural to consume this much media or like information on a daily basis. So if you decrease the amount of information that you receive on a daily basis, funny enough, you actually learn more, you store more, because there's just not too much information all the time. The information that you do get is of much more value. It is sustainable and it is kept in your mind instead of going out from one ear to another. And also, like for me, I know that if I'm scrolling too much, I'm kind of creating the habit of impatience, because I am impatiently looking for content that is satisfying my cravings. Or if I'm just, for example, commuting or doing anything that is basically feeling like doing nothing, I immediately get the urge to get my phone with me because I am bored. But in a way, this is impatience, and in Islam we are supposed to practice sabr. I know sabr is usually patience during real trials or having patience during struggles, but like even on a small daily basis, you should have the patience to be in a moment of silence for just a few minutes. Again, I don't want to shame myself into thinking certain ways, but isn't it embarrassing that I don't have the patience to just be for a moment without having the urge to consume? things that don't even stick with me at all. So here were my practical tips on how to stop wasting your time, specifically on social media. I really truly hope this benefited you. I want to leave the episode with a small challenge for you, which is that every day during this Ramadan, set aside at least 1 hour where you're not on your screen, so a screen-free hour, and don't make this a time when you're sleeping because that doesn't count. And use the time to do something intentional. So read Quran, make dua, simply sit in silence. That can also be beneficial for you if it makes sure that you're not doom scrolling. And reflect. Start small and maybe increase this over time, and you can notice how much barakah comes into your day. And also try out the exercise that I mentioned earlier in the episode, where basically after every post you reflect on how that post makes you feel. It feels so silly, but it gives you a new perspective on how you are consuming social media. Now, as some final words, I'd like to remind you that time is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so let's use it wisely. And specifically during this blessed month, I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses your time, increases your worship, and accepts all of your efforts this Ramadan. May He help us break free from distractions and draw closer to Him. Ameen. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a sister, leave a review. It really helps me out, and let me know your thoughts. You can do this either on the Cult to Success Instagram page, in the comments on Spotify, or on YouTube as well. And yeah, until next time, take care and stay focused for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.